I never imagined my golden years would turn out like this. One day I was Grandma Eleanor, the hero who taught my grandchildren how to fish and build campfires at our cherished lake house. The next, I was just an afterthought in their busy lives, my calls going to voicemail, my invitations met with excuses. After 30 years of maintaining that waterfront property, of creating magical summers filled with memories, I made a decision that shocked everyone. I sold the lake house they loved without telling a single family member. Looking back now, I can pinpoint exactly when everything changed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone flipped a switch after my daughter Rebecca married into the Wellington family. Suddenly, my humble lake house with its weathered dock and cozy bedrooms couldn't compete with Caribbean cruises and European vacations. I became the unpaid childcare provider during inconvenient school holidays rather than the grandmother they couldn't wait to visit. The realization cut deeper than any fishing hook ever could. My name is Eleanor Harmon, and at 71 years old, I thought I had earned the right to be more than just convenient childcare. The lake house on Pinewood Lake had been in our family since my late husband Richard and I scraped together every penny we had to buy it in 1982. It wasn't fancy, just a 3-bedroom cabin with a screened porch and a dock that needed repairs every other spring, but it was our sanctuary. Richard had built the stone pathway to the water. We'd carved our children's heights into the kitchen door frame. Later, we'd added our grandchildren's measurements too, watching them shoot up year after year like the pine trees surrounding the property. When Richard passed away 7 years ago, everyone assumed I'd sell the lake house. It was too much for one person to maintain, they said, but I held on to it fiercely. It was where I still felt closest to him, where the grandkids could still connect with the grandfather they'd adored. I wanted them to grow up with the same summers their mother had experienced, catching fireflies in mason jars, learning to paddle a canoe, falling asleep to the chorus of frogs and crickets instead of the ping of smartphone notifications. For a while, it worked beautifully. Rebecca would drop off Lily and Ethan for weeks at a time during summer breaks. I taught Ethan how to bait a hook when he was just 5, beaming with pride the first time he reeled in a smallmouth bass all by himself. Lily and I would spend hours in the old rowboat, drifting among the water lilies while she sketched in her notebook and told me about her dreams of becoming an artist someday. Those were precious days, worth every blister from hammering loose boards back into place and every dollar spent on property taxes. Then Rebecca met Charles Wellington III at a charity gala, a divorced father with a family name tied to real estate, development, and a lifestyle that made our lake house look like a primitive outpost. Their whirlwind romance led to marriage within a year, and suddenly my grandchildren had access to a world of country clubs, ski chalets, and vacations that required passports. I was happy for my daughter finding love again. Truly I was. But I never expected what came next. That first summer after the wedding, the excuses began. Ethan had tennis camp. Lily was attending an art program in New York. The following Christmas, it was a family trip to Aspen. Spring break meant the Bahamas. Each time I swallowed my disappointment and said I understood. Each time I opened the lake house anyway, just in case they changed their minds. "Mom, the kids' schedules are just so packed these days," Rebecca would explain during our increasingly brief phone calls. "But we need a favor. Could you take them President's Day weekend? Charles and I have a couples retreat, and the housekeeper has that weekend off." So that became our new relationship. I was no longer the destination. I was the backup childcare option when their regular arrangements fell through. The lake house was no longer the magical summer kingdom. It was just the place they stayed when there were no better offers on the table. The lowest point came last August. After not seeing the kids for nearly 6 months, I'd spent weeks preparing for their visit. I'd stocked the refrigerator with Ethan's favorite root beer and bought new art supplies for Lily. I'd even hired a local teenager to help me repair the floating dock and give the place a fresh coat of paint. The morning they were supposed to arrive, Rebecca called. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but something's come up. Charles's parents have invited us to their place in the Hamptons. It's such a great networking opportunity for Charles, and the kids are excited. About the beach club." I stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the freshly baked cookies cooling on the counter. Snickerdoodles with extra cinnamon, Lily and Ethan's favorite. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "Not really. We'll reschedule, I promise. Maybe Labor Day weekend?" But Labor Day came and went with another cancellation. When Halloween approached, I called to invite them for the small-town festival that Lily had always loved as a younger child. "Oh, Mom," Rebecca sighed in that tone that had become all too familiar. "The kids have outgrown that sort of thing. Besides, they've been invited to the Wellington's annual costume gala. It's quite exclusive. The governor might even make an appearance." That night, sitting alone on the dock watching the sunset reflect across the water, I made my decision. The lake house had always been about family, a place for connections, traditions, and memories. Without them, it was just an aging structure, requiring constant maintenance and eating away at my retirement savings. The property taxes alone had nearly doubled in the past 5 years as wealthy developers built increasingly luxurious homes around the lake. If the lake house no longer served its purpose of bringing my family together, perhaps it was time to let it go. Not out of spite, but out of pragmatism tinged with a sorrow I couldn't quite shake. The next morning, I called a realtor. What I never expected was how quickly it would sell, or how the decision would ripple through my family like a stone dropped into still water. But that's getting ahead of the story. First, I should tell you about Harold Lawson, my neighbor for 20-odd years, who was the only person I confided in about my plans. The morning fog still clung to Pinewood Lake when Harold spotted me, loading boxes into my SUV. He'd lived in the A-frame 3 properties down since before Richard and I had bought our place, and over the decades had become more than just a neighbor. After Richard passed, Harold was the one who'd check in with fresh fish from his morning catch and conversation when I spent too many days alone at the lake. "Eleanor Harmon, what in the world are you doing at this hour?" he called, crossing my overgrown lawn in his rubber boots, a mug of coffee in hand. At 74, Harold moved with the confidence of someone who had spent his life outdoors, silver hair still thick despite his years, his face weathered but kind. "Just some spring cleaning," I replied, not yet ready to share my decision. Harold's eyebrows rose skeptically as he peered into my vehicle filled with photo albums and family keepsakes. "Awfully specific spring cleaning." We'd settled into an easy friendship over the years, particularly after we'd both found ourselves widowed. Harold had lost his wife Marie to cancer 9 years ago. Unlike me, he'd immediately thrown himself into outdoor activities, leading fishing tours for tourists, volunteering with the Lake Conservation Committee, teaching wilderness skills at the summer camp across the lake. He'd tried countless times to pull me into his active lifestyle, but I'd always declined. The lake house and my grandchildren had been enough. "Come have coffee," he insisted. "Whatever you're doing can wait half an hour." Inside my kitchen, its knotty pine cabinets and Formica countertops unchanged since the 1980s, Harold studied me with the direct gaze of someone who spent decades reading weather patterns and water conditions. "You're selling the place, aren't you?" he asked after I'd poured him a refill. The question hung in the air like the dust motes dancing in the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. I hadn't spoken the words aloud yet, and hearing them made my chest tighten. "How did you know?" "Eleanor, I've watched you maintain this place single-handedly for years, seen you rake every leaf and plant every flower. You wouldn't be packing up precious items unless something significant had changed." He paused, his expression softening. "The grandkids haven't been here in quite a while, have they?" And so I told him everything. About Rebecca's marriage, about preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The gradual evolution from cherished grandmother to emergency babysitter, about the canceled visits and forgotten phone calls, about the sense that the simple pleasures of the lake house couldn't compete with the allure of the Wellingtons' lifestyle. I spent $200 on specialized watercolor papers for Lily last summer, I said, gesturing to the unopened packages still sitting on the shelf in what we'd always called the kids' room. She never even saw them. Harold listened, without interruption, occasionally nodding in understanding. He'd been luckier than me. His son had settled just one town over, and his grandchildren still visited regularly. But he understood the particular ache of feeling replaced, having watched his own role in their lives shift as they grew older and their interests changed. I don't want to be bitter, I admitted, tracing the familiar knot in the wooden table where Richard used to rest his coffee mug every morning. I don't want to be that cranky old woman resenting her family for moving on with their lives. But I also can't keep pouring my heart and savings into a place they've outgrown. Have you told Rebecca about your decision? Harold asked gently. I shook my head. Not yet. I wanted to be certain myself first. The realtor's coming tomorrow to take photos. And you think selling the lake house will solve the problem? The question caught me off guard. It's not about solving problems. It's about accepting reality. This place was meant for family gatherings, for passing down traditions. If that's not happening anymore, I'm just maintaining an expensive monument to the past. What I didn't say, what I could barely admit to myself, was the hope that perhaps the prospect of losing the lake house would remind them of what they were giving up. That maybe, just maybe, the thought of no more summers at Grandma's lake would make them realize what they'd taken for granted. Harold saw through me, of course. He'd been seeing through my defenses since Richard's funeral when I'd insisted I was managing just fine while barely remembering to eat. Eleanor, he said carefully, you've built your entire retirement around being grandma at the lake house. If you sell it, who will you be? The question hit like a thunderclap. Who indeed? For 38 years I'd been an elementary school librarian, helping children discover the magic of books, rewarding work but hardly the stuff of passionate identity. After retirement, my role as lake house caretaker and summer grandmother had defined me completely. Without it, what remained? I started, then faltered. I'll figure it out. Harold didn't push, but his question lingered long after. He'd headed home, promising to check in later. I continued packing, sorting through decades of accumulated memories. In the boathouse, I found the child-sized life vest Ethan had worn during his first swimming lessons, Ethan written in Richard's block handwriting across the inside collar. In the kitchen drawer, I discovered the collection of smooth stones Lily had gathered over years of beachcombing, each one carefully labeled with the date and some childish observation. Looks like a turtle. Or sparkles in water. By mid-afternoon, I found myself on the dock, surrounded by the quiet beauty that had drawn Richard and me here all those years ago. The lake stretched before me, its surface rippling gently in the spring breeze. On the opposite shore, I could see the Wellington property, one of the newer luxury homes with its boathouse bigger than my entire cabin, its expansive deck hosting catered parties every holiday weekend. I'd never met Charles's parents, despite their property being visible from my dock for the past 5 years. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Here I sat on weathered boards that needed replacing again, while across the water stood everything. My simple lake house wasn't grand, impressive, modern. No wonder the children preferred it there. What child wouldn't? As the sun began its descent toward the pine-covered hills, painting the water in amber and gold, I made peace with my decision. The lake house had served its purpose for a beautiful chapter of our family story. Now, it was time to close that chapter with dignity, rather than let it deteriorate into disappointment and resentment. That night, I pulled out my worn leather journal, a habit I'd maintained since college, and wrote, A simple entry. Tomorrow I begin a new chapter. The lake house has given all it can. It's time to let go. The words blurred slightly as unexpected tears fell onto the page, but my resolve remained firm. The first real warning sign came 3 summers ago, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. Rebecca had just started dating Charles, and she brought him to the lake house for the 4th of July weekend, a tradition our family hadn't missed in decades. The grandchildren were still young enough to be enchanted by the simple pleasures of the lake. Ethan at 10 was becoming a confident swimmer, while Lily at 12 had discovered the joy of kayaking alone to the small island in the center of the lake, where she'd spend hours with her sketchbook. Charles Wellington III arrived in a gleaming European sports car that looked comically out of place on our gravel driveway. He was polite enough, complimenting the rustic charm of the cabin with the careful tone of someone used to much finer accommodations. Still, he made an effort that weekend, joining us for fishing, though he brought his own high-end gear, and even helping with the cookout, though he suggested several times that we could have easily catered the event. It was during the evening fireworks, as we all sat on the dock watching the colorful explosions reflect across the water, that I overheard his conversation with Rebecca. "The children seem to love it here," he said, his arm around my daughter's shoulders. "They've spent every summer here since they were born," Rebecca replied. "It's been a constant in their lives, especially after the divorce." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "It's charming in its way, though have you considered the educational advantages of more varied experiences? The Wellingtons have a family tradition of summer educational travel. Last year, my niece and nephew spent 3 weeks in Italy learning about Renaissance art firsthand." Rebecca laughed softly. "On a teacher's salary and a freelance writer's income? This lake is as exotic as we get." "Well," Charles said, "perhaps that could change." I pretended not to hear, focusing instead on helping Ethan arrange sparklers in the sand. But something in their exchange left me uneasy. A subtle suggestion that our lake traditions were somehow lacking, that my grandchildren deserved better than what I could provide. The next warning came during Christmas that same year. Rebecca and Charles had been dating for several months, and he'd invited her and the children to join his family at their winter home in Vermont. For the first time in their lives, Lily and Ethan wouldn't be with me for the holidays. I understood, of course. New relationships meant new traditions, and the children were excited about the prospect of a white Christmas with skiing and professional decorations. "We'll come for New Year's, Mom," Rebecca promised over the phone. "The kids can't wait to tell you all about the trip." They did come for New Year's, but something had shifted. As they described the Wellington family Christmas, the professional chef, the custom-designed decorations, the private ski instructor, I could see a new awareness in their eyes. They were glimpsing a different world, one where money smoothed all rough edges and created experiences far beyond what our family had ever known. "Grandma, they had a real orchestra playing at their Christmas party," Lily told me, eyes wide with wonder. "Mr. Wellington said maybe next year we could go to their place in Switzerland instead," Ethan added. "They have a chalet right on the Sau mountain." I smiled and nodded, happy for their excitement, while ignoring the small voice inside that whispered, "They're slipping away." Rebecca noticed my quietness as we washed dishes that evening, the children already asleep in their usual room. "They still had a wonderful time today, Mom," she said, bumping my shoulder affectionately with hers. "All Ethan talked about on the drive here was going ice fishing with you tomorrow." "I know," I said, forcing a smile. "And it's good for them to experience different things. The Wellingtons seem very generous." Rebecca hesitated, setting down the plate she'd been drying. "Charles is talking about marriage, Mom." The news shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow it did. "That's fast." "When you know," she replied with a small smile. "He's good to us, Mom, and he adores the kids." "Are you happy?" I asked, the only question that really mattered. "I am," she said, and the certainty in her voice was undeniable. After everything with David. She didn't need to finish the thought. My daughter's divorce from the children's father had been painful for everyone, with David eventually moving across the country and becoming an increasingly distant figure in his children's lives. "Then I'm happy for you," I told her, and I meant it, despite the unsettled feeling I couldn't quite shake. The wedding came 6 months later, a lavish affair at the Wellington family estate, where I felt distinctly out of place among politicians, executives, and old money families. The grandchildren were radiant in their formal attire, Ethan as ring bearer and Lily as junior bridesmaid. They seemed to adapt to this new world with the easy flexibility of youth, while I smiled stiffly in photos and made awkward small talk with Charles's mother, who kept referring to Pinewood Lake as that quaint little pond up north. That summer brought the third warning sign, clear enough that even I couldn't ignore it. The annual 2-week stay at the lake house, a sacrosanct tradition since the children were infants, was shortened to 5 days. Rebecca called with profuse apologies. "The thing is, Mom, Charles's parents have already planned this Alaskan cruise as a wedding gift, and the dates can't be changed. The kids are thrilled about seeing glaciers and whales." I assured her it was fine, that 5 days would still be wonderful, that of course they should enjoy the cruise. And those 5 days were good. We fished and swam and roasted marshmallows just as always. But I noticed how Ethan checked his new phone constantly for messages from his stepfather about their upcoming trip, how Lily compared the lake unfavorably to the ocean she'd seen on their honeymoon visit to Hawaii. On their last evening, as we sat on the dock watching the sunset, Lily surprised me with a question. "Grandma, will you always keep the lake house?" "That's the plan," I replied, curious about her sudden interest. "Why do you ask?" She shrugged, trailing her fingers through the water. "Charles's mom says all these old family cabins will probably be torn down eventually to build nicer houses. She says the property is worth more than the buildings." The casual comment revealed how these new influences were already reshaping her worldview. To Mrs. Wellington, our beloved lake house was just an outdated structure occupying valuable real estate. "Some things are worth more than money, Lily," I said gently. "This place holds our family memories." She nodded, but her gaze drifted across the lake to the Wellington property, where lights were already coming on as dusk approached, the large house glowing like a luxury liner among smaller craft. "I guess," she said, but her tone lacked conviction. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I sat alone on the screened porch and acknowledged what I'd been avoiding. Things were changing, and not in my favor. The easy rhythm of our family traditions was being replaced by the Wellington way. More expensive, more impressive, more everything. And against that, what chance did my humble lake house stand? Still, I told myself it was just a phase. The children were being dazzled by novelty, but eventually they'd remember what really mattered. The lake house would always be here, a constant in their changing lives. How wrong I was. The truth crystallized during what should have been a routine spring morning. I was planting geraniums in the window boxes, the annual burst of color that Richard had always claimed made the cabin look like something from a postcard, when my phone rang. It was Rebecca, calling from her office at the private school where she taught English. "Mom, I need a huge favor," she began, her voice tight, with that particular stress I recognized from years of parenting. "Ethan has a 2-day suspension for talking back to his math teacher, and I can't take time off because of final exams. Charles is in Boston for a conference. Could you possibly come to the city and stay with him? I don't want him alone in the house." "Of course," I said without hesitation. "I'll drive down this afternoon." This was what grandmothers did. Stepped in during family emergencies. I packed quickly, leaving the half-planted window boxes, and made the 3-hour drive to their suburban home outside of Philadelphia. Ethan was sullen when I arrived, barely looking up from his gaming console when I entered the expansive family. room of their Tudor-style house. At 13, he'd hit that awkward stage of adolescence where gangly limbs and changing voice conspired to create constant embarrassment. "Hey, sweetheart," I greeted him, using the nickname he'd once loved. "No one says sweetheart anymore, Grandma," he muttered, eyes fixed on his game. I let the comment slide, settling into an armchair to watch him play. The game involved realistic military combat, something I was fairly certain Rebecca wouldn't have approved of before her remarriage. "Want to tell me what happened at school?" I asked after a few minutes. Ethan shrugged. "Mr. Peterson is a jerk. He said I wasn't applying myself, and I told him his class was boring." "Ah," I said. "And was that all you said?" A flicker of guilt crossed his face. "I might have used some words Mom doesn't allow in the house." I nodded, remembering Rebecca at this age. That volatile combination of hormones and undeveloped impulse control. "Everyone makes mistakes. The question is, what? Do you learn from them?" He finally paused his game. "Charles says I should have been strategic. That if I don't like a teacher, I should just do the minimum to get by and focus my energy on more important things." I blinked, surprised by this rather cynical advice from his stepfather. "And what does your mom say?" "That I need to respect adults even when I disagree with them." He rolled his eyes. "But then she goes and complains about her principal all the time, so—" The conversation shifted to other topics after that, but the exchange stayed with me. There was a new hardness to Ethan, a calculation that hadn't been there before. During my 2-day stay, I tried several times to engage him in activities we'd enjoyed at the lake, suggesting we look for birds in the nearby park, offering to teach him a new card game, proposing we bake cookies together as we'd done countless times in the lake house kitchen. Each suggestion was met with disinterest. "That's little kid stuff," he declared when I mentioned card games. When I proposed baking, he simply called the family's meal delivery service using an app on his phone. By the time Rebecca returned from work on the second day, I felt like I barely recognized my grandson. "Thanks for coming," Rebecca said, as she walked me to my car. "I know it's a long drive." "Anytime," I assured her. "Though I'm a bit worried about Ethan. He seems different." Rebecca sighed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "He's at that age, Mom. Everything changes." "I understand adolescence," I said carefully. "This seems like more than that." A flash of defensiveness crossed her face. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing specifically," I backpedaled, not wanting to create tension. "Just that he doesn't seem interested in any of the things he used to love. Maybe this summer at the lake we could reconnect." "About that," Rebecca interrupted, a slight wince betraying her discomfort. "We've been meaning to talk to you. The kids have so many commitments this summer. Ethan has basketball camp and Lily got into this prestigious art program in Maine. And then Charles's parents have invited us all to their place in the Hamptons for most of August." My heart sank as I realized what she was saying. "They won't be coming to the lake at all." Rebecca touched my arm. "Maybe for a weekend in July. I'll have to check everyone's schedules. It's just so complicated now with all their activities." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without revealing my disappointment. As I drove the 3 hours back to the lake house, I tallied up the changes of the past 2 years. The shortened visits, the canceled plans, the growing disinterest in activities they'd once loved. The pattern was unmistakable. The situation came into even sharper focus a few weeks later when I received a large envelope in the mail. Inside was a glossy brochure for Camp Everwood, New England's premier residential art experience, along with a handwritten note from Lily. "Grandma, I got a full scholarship to this amazing art camp. Charles helped me with my application. I'll be there for 6 weeks this summer learning from real professional artists." "Isn't that cool? Love you, Lily." I studied the brochure, noting the pristine facilities, the famous visiting artists, the gallery exhibitions. It was undoubtedly an incredible opportunity for a talented 15-year-old. It was also scheduled for exactly the same week she had traditionally spent at the lake house. I called Rebecca that evening, genuinely happy for Lily's accomplishment, but needing to understand what it meant for our summer plans. It's an amazing opportunity, Rebecca confirmed. These scholarships are nearly impossible to get. I'm proud of her, I said, and I was. I just wondered if this means neither of the kids will be coming to the lake this summer. There was a pause before she replied. Mom, they're growing up. Their worlds are expanding. It doesn't mean they don't love you or the lake house, but they have opportunities we could never have provided before. The we stung. It no longer included me. Of course, I said. I understand. But as I hung up, I realized what was really happening. The lake house represented a simpler, less affluent past. The Wellingtons were offering a future with connections, opportunities and experiences I couldn't match. It wasn't malicious. Rebecca wasn't deliberately pulling them away from me. But the gravity of wealth and privilege was inexorably drawing my grandchildren into a different orbit. One where Grandma Eleanor and her rustic lake house became increasingly irrelevant. That night, I pulled out the photo albums from the built-in bookcase Richard had insisted on installing for all our future memories. Page after page showed the children's evolution at the lake. Lily's first tentative steps across the dock. Ethan's proud grin holding up a sunfish, both of them covered in mud after a rainstorm, making sand castles on the small beach, curled, up reading on the window seat during thunderstorms. The last photos were from 2 summers ago. The album still had empty pages waiting for new memories that now would never come. The lake house wasn't just a property. It was the physical embodiment of our family's history, of Richard's presence, of my role as Grandma Eleanor. And now, slowly, but surely it was becoming just a building, a financial asset rather than the beating heart of our family traditions. The problem wasn't just that the grandchildren were busy. It was that they, and their mother, were choosing a different kind of life, one where the lake house and all it represented had no meaningful place. The breaking point came unexpectedly, on a rainy Tuesday in June. I was repainting the kitchen cabinets, a project I'd put off for years, when I heard a car coming up the gravel driveway. Through the window, I spotted Rebecca's sleek SUV, a surprising sight on a weekday when she should have been teaching. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to meet her, concern immediately rising. Rebecca never made the 3-hour drive impulsively. "Everything okay?" I asked as she stepped onto the porch, shaking raindrops from her jacket. "Fine, Mom," she replied, but her tight smile suggested otherwise. I thought we should talk, and it seemed better to do it in person. In the kitchen, I put on coffee while Rebecca paced, her nervous energy filling the small space. Finally, she sat at the table, fingers tapping an anxious rhythm on the worn surface. "I have a proposition for you," she began. "Charles and I have been discussing your situation here." "My situation?" I interrupted, immediately on guard. "The lake house," she clarified. "The maintenance, the property taxes, the isolation. You're not getting any younger, Mom. It's a lot for one person to manage." I set mugs of coffee on the table with more force than necessary. "I manage just fine." Rebecca sighed. "That's not—" "Look, Charles's mother is expanding their lakefront holdings. She's already purchased the Miller and Prescott properties on either side of yours." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the rainy day. Victoria Wellington was buying up the original family cabins one by one, replacing them with luxury vacation homes or selling the improved lots at a premium. "She's expressed interest in your property," Rebecca continued. "She's willing to make a very generous offer, well above market value." I stared at my daughter, barely recognizing her. "You came here to tell me Charles's mother wants to buy my home?" "It's an investment opportunity, Mom, for all of us." Rebecca leaned forward. "You could buy a nice condo closer to us in Philadelphia. See the kids more often?" "The same kids who haven't been here in nearly 2 years?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Rebecca flinched. "That's not fair." They've had opportunities. Opportunities that somehow always conflict with visiting their grandmother, I finished. Strangely, they always found time when they were younger and had less money. Things change, Rebecca said, her voice hardening. Children grow up. Their interests evolve. Their interests didn't evolve naturally, I countered. They were guided toward a different lifestyle, one where catching fireflies and paddling canoes can't compete with exclusive camps and European vacations. Rebecca's face flushed. So that's it? You resent Charles for giving them experiences we couldn't afford? I resent being used as a convenient babysitter when it suits your schedule, then pushed aside when something better comes along, I said, the words spilling out after years of silent hurt. I resent watching my grandchildren being taught that wealth determines worth. That's not what's happening, Rebecca protested, but her eyes dropped to her coffee mug. Isn't it? I reached for the envelope of camp brochures on the counter and slid it across the table. Ethan's basketball camp, Lily's art program, the Wellington family vacations, they all mysteriously overlap with traditional lake house time. That's not coincidence, Rebecca. They're opportunities. They're choices, I interrupted. Choices that consistently prioritize the Wellington world over time with me. Rebecca stood abruptly. This is exactly why I didn't want to have this conversation over the phone. You're being irrational and, frankly, self-centered. The children's lives don't revolve around your expectations. And your life doesn't revolve around the Wellingtons' expectations, I countered. Yet here you are, doing their real estate bidding. She snatched her purse from the counter. I came here trying to help you, offering a solution that benefits everyone. The lake house is becoming a financial burden you don't need. The property value will never be higher. The lake house isn't about property value, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. It's where Richard and I built our family. Where you learned to swim. Where your children connected with their grandfather's memory. Rebecca's expression softened momentarily before hardening again. And those memories won't disappear if you sell. Be practical, Mom. Take the money. Get a place that makes sense for this chapter of your life. I looked at my daughter, really, looked at her, and realized she genuinely couldn't understand what the lake house meant to me. In her new world, everything was transactional, even family properties. The answer is no, I said firmly. I won't sell to Wellington or anyone else. This house stays in our family. Rebecca sighed heavily. Then I don't know when the kids will visit again. Their summers are fully booked through next year, and the EI holidays. She trailed off, the implication clear. I see, I said, though what I really saw was the end of an era. So I either sell to your mother-in-law, or I don't see my grandchildren. That's not what I said, she protested. It's what you meant, I replied. We stared at each other across the kitchen table, the rain drumming on the roof filling the silence between us. In that moment, I realized that the battle for my grandchildren's time and attention was already lost. They were fully immersed in the Wellington world now, with its privileges and connections. And apparently, there was no room in that world for a simple lake house and the grandmother who cherished it. When Rebecca left shortly after, our goodbye was stiff and formal, so different from the warm embraces we'd always shared. I stood on the porch watching her drive away, the rain soaking through my cardigan, feeling as though something precious had just slipped through my fingers. That evening, as twilight settled over the lake, I sat at Richard's old desk and pulled out a notepad. At the top, I wrote options and began listing possibilities. Keep the lake house, hoping the children will someday return to it. Sell to Victoria Wellington and use the money to move closer to the grandchildren. Sell to someone else entirely and start fresh somewhere new. None of the options felt right. The first seemed like clinging to a fantasy. The second felt like capitulation. The third felt like abandonment. I was still sitting there, pen in hand, when my phone rang. It was Harold. Saw Rebecca's car earlier, he said without preamble. Everything. Okay? Not really, I admitted, too tired for pretense. She came to tell me Victoria Wellington wants to buy my property. Harold was silent for a moment. And what did you say? I said no. But apparently that means I won't be seeing much of my grandchildren. Ah, he sighed. Emotional blackmail. Classy. Despite everything, I found myself smiling at his bluntness. She didn't see it that way. Of course not, Harold said. People rarely recognize their own manipulations. The simple validation of my feelings brought unexpected tears to my eyes. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly feel the hurt, the rejection, the sense of being replaced. What should I do, Harold? I asked, my voice breaking slightly. That's not for me to say, he replied gently. But whatever you decide, do it because it's right for you, not because Rebecca or the Wellingtons are pressuring you. You deserve better than being someone's convenient grandmother when it suits their schedule. After we hung up, I went out to the dock despite the light rain still falling. The lake was a sheet of rippling silver in the fading light, the distant shores hazy through the mist. This place had been my refuge, my joy, my connection to Richard and to generations of family memories. But perhaps holding on to it was holding me back. Perhaps by clinging to what the lake house had once meant, I was preventing myself from discovering what my life could still become. That night, I made a decision that surprised even me, one that would either shake my family awake or sever our connections even further. Either way, it would be on my terms, not theirs. The week after Rebecca's visit passed in a haze of conflicting emotions. During daylight hours, I kept busy with mindless tasks, scrubbing the bathroom tiles until my knuckles were raw, organizing kitchen drawers that had accumulated decades of utensils, weeding flower beds with such ferocity that Harold joked I might uproot the entire garden. Physical exhaustion was preferable to dwelling on the painful truth. My family had outgrown me. Nights were harder. Without the distraction of chores, memories flooded in. Rebecca learning to dive off the dock. At age 7, her triumphant grin revealing a missing front tooth. Richard teaching Ethan to cast a fishing line, his large hands enveloping the boy's small ones. Lily presenting me with a watercolor of the lake at sunset, proudly announcing she would be an artist when she grew up. The memories felt like treasures from another life, one that increasingly seemed to exist only in my mind. "You're not sleeping," Harold observed when he stopped by with fresh strawberries from his garden. The dark circles under my eyes must have given me away. "Not much," I admitted, inviting him onto the porch where a gentle breeze provided relief from the June humidity. "Have you decided what to do about the house?" he asked, settling into the wicker chair that had been Richard's favorite spot. "Not yet." I poured us both glasses of iced tea. Part of me wants to hold on, hoping they'll come back someday. Another part wonders if I'm just being stubborn. Harold considered this, his weathered hands wrapped around the sweating glass. "Eleanor, do you remember what you told me when Marie died? When I was thinking about selling my place?" I shook my head, the memory lost in the fog of grief that had followed Richard's death. "You said, 'Don't make any big decisions while your heart is still bleeding.'" Good advice. I've always remembered it. His words caught me off guard. Had I really been that wise once? That compassionate? "My heart's been bleeding for 2 years," I said quietly. "Ever since they started pulling away." Harold nodded. "Then maybe it's time to decide what will help it heal, not what will make Rebecca or the grandkids happy. What will make you happy, Eleanor?" The question lingered in my mind long after Harold left. What would make me happy? I'd spent so many years defining my happiness through others, first as Richard's wife, then as Rebecca's mother, finally as Lily and Ethan's grandmother. Without those roles to anchor me, who was I? What did Eleanor Harmon want from her remaining years? That evening, I found myself drawn to Richard's study, a small room off the living area that I'd largely left untouched since his death. His collection of carved wooden birds still lined the shelves. His reading glasses rested on the battered copy of Thoreau he'd been reading when his heart gave out. I sat at his desk and pulled open the bottom drawer where he'd kept important papers. Among the folders, I found a small leather journal I'd never seen before. Opening it, I recognized Richard's handwriting immediately. It wasn't a diary exactly, more a collection of thoughts and observations. I flipped through, stopping randomly at an entry dated 3 summers before he died. Eleanor has spent the entire week preparing for Rebecca and the kids to arrive. New quilts on their beds, their favorite foods stocked in the pantry, even repainted. The rowboat, because Lily mentioned last year that she wished it was blue instead of green. She gives so much of herself to making their time here special. I wonder sometimes if she realizes she deserves happiness beyond being their grandmother. She has so many gifts that have nothing to do with family roles. Tears blurred my vision as I read his words. Even then, Richard had seen what I couldn't, that I'd been slowly surrendering my identity to my role as grandmother, caretaker of traditions, keeper of the lake house. I continued reading, each entry revealing Richard's quiet observations about our life together, his appreciation for details I'd thought went unnoticed. In one of the final entries, written just weeks before his death, he'd penned, "If anything happens to me, I hope Eleanor remembers she still has her own journey to complete. The lake house has been our haven, but it's the people who make a place special, not the other way around. I want her to go wherever her heart leads, even if that's somewhere I've never been." Permission. Richard had given me permission to move forward, to change, to seek new happiness even without him. And in doing so, perhaps he'd given me the courage to make the decision that had been forming in my mind since Rebecca's visit. The next morning, I called a real estate agent, not the one Rebecca had suggested, but Lisa Abernathy, a local agent, who'd handled several properties around the lake. "I'd like to discuss selling my house," I told her, "but I have some specific conditions about who can purchase it." Lisa Abernathy arrived promptly at 10 the next morning, her practical sedan a refreshing contrast to the luxury vehicles that increasingly dominated the lake community. In her mid-50s with sensible shoes and a no-nonsense demeanor, she projected exactly the kind of straightforward competence I needed. "Beautiful property," she remarked as we walked the grounds. "Original cabin, right? From the 1950s? 1954, I confirmed. My husband's father built it himself. Richard expanded it in the 80s, added the screened porch and master bedroom." Lisa nodded, making notes. "The vintage charm is actually a selling point these days, though some buyers will want to renovate." She glanced at me. "You mentioned specific conditions?" I took a deep breath. "I won't sell to Victoria Wellington or any member of the Wellington family. I know they're buying up lakefront properties for development, but I don't want this place torn down and replaced with something that looks like it belongs in a luxury resort catalog." Lisa's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't comment on my stipulation. "Any other conditions?" "I'd prefer to sell to a family," I said. "Someone who will appreciate the history here, who will use it for gathering rather than as an investment. Property, and I'd like a reasonably quick sale. 90 days maximum." "I understand." Lisa's practical tone was reassuring. "Given the lakefront location and the current market, I don't anticipate difficulties meeting your time frame, even with the conditions. I'll need to take measurements and photos. Then we can discuss pricing." While Lisa worked, I sat on the dock, watching sunlight dance across the water. The decision to sell felt simultaneously heart-wrenching and liberating. This place had been the center of my world for so long, the repository of my happiest memories, the physical link to Richard, the backdrop for my grandchildren's childhood adventures. Letting it go felt like severing a limb. Yet there was also a curious lightness in the decision. For years, I'd been maintaining this property mostly for others. For Rebecca and the grandchildren who might visit, for the ghost of Richard, for the woman I had been when our family was whole. The lake house had become both shrine and prison, trapping me in patterns of expectation that no longer served me. Lisa found me still sitting there an hour later, her work complete. Based on comparable properties in the current market, I'd recommend listing at $875,000, she said, settling beside me on the dock. Given the condition and the original features, that's realistic. We could go higher, but it might extend your time frame. The figure startled me. When Richard and I had purchased the property, we'd paid just $68,000, a stretch for a school librarian and a mechanical engineer with a young daughter. The area's transformation from humble vacation community to upscale destination had driven prices to levels that seemed almost obscene. That seems high, I managed. Lisa smiled sympathetically. The market around the lake has exploded. Limited waterfront, increasing demand. Victoria Wellington's development activities have actually driven prices up further. She paused. Speaking of which, she'll likely attempt to purchase through a proxy once she learns the property is available. How firm is your condition about not selling to her? Absolutely firm, I said without hesitation. I'll take less money if necessary. Lisa nodded, understanding. One more thing to consider. The sale will become public knowledge. Your family will find out, even if you don't. Tell them directly. I'd thought about this, of course. The prospect of Rebecca's reaction, her hurt, her anger, her disbelief, had kept me awake at night. But continuing to maintain the lake house as a temple to a family dynamic that no longer existed wasn't serving anyone, least of all me. I understand, I said. Let's proceed with the listing. That evening, I called Harold to share my decision. His response was a thoughtful silence, followed by a single question. What comes next for you, Eleanor? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the decision to sell that I hadn't fully considered what would follow. I don't know, I admitted. I haven't thought that far ahead. Perhaps that's the next step then, he suggested gently. Before you tell Rebecca, before the sold sign goes up, figure out what Eleanor wants from the next chapter. That night, I pulled out a fresh notebook and began a list titled, What Comes Next? The first entry came easily. A place with fewer memories and more possibilities. The second took longer. Rediscover who I am without the lake house. By midnight, I had filled 3 pages with possibilities. Some practical, some wildly improbable, all exhilarating in their newness. For the first time in years, I fell asleep, thinking not of what I was losing, but of what I might find. Lisa wasted no time listing the property. Within days, professional photos showcasing the charming lakefront retreat with authentic vintage details appeared online and in local real estate publications. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By the end of the first week, 17 potential buyers had toured the property, 8 had submitted offers, and Lisa was orchestrating a bidding war that pushed the price well above the original asking amount. I observed this whirlwind with detached fascination, as if it were happening to someone else. Each time strangers walked through my home, exclaiming over the quaint kitchen or the rustic character of the pine walls, I felt another thread of attachment begin to loosen. The lake house was becoming less mine with each passing day, transforming from beloved home to desirable commodity before my eyes. True to her prediction, Lisa reported that Victoria Wellington had indeed attempted to purchase through a business associate. I declined their offer outright, she informed me with professional satisfaction. They came back with a higher number. I explained that price wasn't the issue. Meanwhile, I focused on my What Comes Next project with the same methodical attention I'd once given to library cataloging. I researched communities within an hour's drive of Philadelphia, close enough to see the grandchildren if the opportunity arose, but not so close as to appear desperate for inclusion. I explored housing options ranging from retirement communities to downtown apartments to small cottages with garden space. I made lists of activities I'd always wanted to try but had never pursued while maintaining the lake house. One morning, Harold stopped by with fresh corn from the farmer's market and found me surrounded by brochures and printouts. "Planning an escape route?" he asked, surveying the papers scattered across the kitchen table. "Exploring options," I corrected. "Did you know there's a community college that offers ceramics classes for seniors? Or that the Philadelphia Museum of Art needs volunteer docents?" Harold smiled, setting the corn on the counter. "You're really doing this, aren't you? Reinventing yourself at 71. "Is that crazy?" I asked, suddenly vulnerable. "Starting over at my age?" "Not crazy," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Brave." 2 days later, Lisa called with news. "We have a final offer. The Mendoza family. He's a pediatrician. She's a high school science teacher. 3 kids, ages 8 to 14. They love the place exactly as it is, history and all. They're offering $915,000 with a 60-day closing." The description caught my attention. "They're not planning to tear it down?" "No," Lisa confirmed. Dr. Mendoza actually mentioned preserving the height markings on the kitchen doorframe. His wife fell in love with the reading nook in the main bedroom. They specifically said they want to honor the house's character while making it their own family gathering place. I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. They sound perfect. They're solid buyers, pre-approved, no contingencies. I've scheduled the signing for Thursday if that works for you. Reality crashed in like a wave. Thursday. 3 days away. I would sign papers and the lake house would no longer be mine. All those years, all those memories, transformed into a bank deposit with the stroke of a pen. "Eleanor?" Lisa prompted when I didn't respond. "Thursday at 10? "Yes," I managed. "Thursday is fine." After hanging up, I wandered through the rooms that had sheltered so many chapters of my life. The kitchen where Richard and I had danced to the radio on rainy nights. The living room where Rebecca had practiced endless recitals on the old upright piano. The small bedroom where the grandchildren had whispered secrets after lights out. I hadn't yet told Rebecca about the sale. Each time I reached for the phone, something stopped me. Not fear exactly, but a protective instinct. This decision was mine, perhaps the first truly independent choice I'd made since Richard died. I needed to complete it without Rebecca's influence, without her attempts to change my mind or make me feel guilty. The Mendozas would honor the house's history. My family's marks would remain, integrated into a new family's story. There was something beautiful in that continuity, even as my own chapter here ended. The next morning, I drove to Riverdale, a small town 30 minutes outside Philadelphia that had appeared repeatedly in my research. It offered the perfect balance, close enough to the grandchildren but with its own distinct character, a walkable downtown, a surprisingly vibrant art scene, and housing prices that would leave me with substantial savings even after purchasing a new home. The real estate agent showed me 3 properties, but it was the third that captured my attention immediately. A 2-bedroom cottage on a tree-lined street, with a sunroom perfect for reading and a small but promising garden plot in the back. Built in the 1930s, it had been thoughtfully updated while maintaining its original charm. "I'll take it," I said, surprising both the agent and myself with my decisiveness. "Don't you want to think about it?" the agent asked. "Maybe come back. With family members for a second look?" "No," I replied, feeling a surge of confidence. "This is my decision. The cottage is perfect." As I drove back to the lake, I realized I was smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time in months. The future beckoned, undefined but full of possibilities I was finally ready to embrace. The day before the scheduled closing, as I was boxing up books from the living room shelves, my phone rang. Rebecca's number lit up the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. I still hadn't told her about the sale, planning to do so in person after everything was finalized. But avoidance had never been my style. "Hello, Rebecca," I answered, steeling myself. "Mom." Her voice was tight. "I just got a call from Diane Miller. She said you're selling the lake house to strangers." Diane Miller, our neighbor for 20 years before selling to the Wellingtons. Of course she'd heard through the local grapevine. "I was planning to tell you after the closing," I said carefully. "I wanted everything settled first." "So it's true?" Her disbelief was palpable. "You're actually selling our family home without even discussing it with me?" The hour stung. "It's my house, Rebecca. And yes, I've found buyers, a lovely family who will appreciate it." "How could you do this?" Her voice cracked with emotion. "Those are our memories, our traditions. Dad loved that place." "Your father would understand," I said, thinking of Richard's journal. "He knew the difference between a house and a home. Our home stopped being here when you all stopped coming." "That's not fair," she protested. "We've been busy, not absent. And what about the children? Have you even considered what this will do to them?" A surge of frustration threatened to overwhelm my composure. When was the last time Ethan or Lily asked about the lake house? When was the last time either of them expressed interest in coming here? Silence answered my question. "I've made my decision, Rebecca," I continued more gently. "I'm signing the papers tomorrow. The Mendozas seem like a wonderful family. 3 children who will actually use the dock and the rowboat and everything else that's been gathering dust. Victoria would still buy it," Rebecca said, switching tactics. "She asked me to tell you she'd increase her offer by 20%. Think what you could do with that money." So this was why she'd called, not out of sentimental attachment, but as Victoria Wellington's proxy. The realization solidified my resolve. "It was never about the money," I said. "I've already found a new place, a cottage near Riverdale. Close enough to visit the grandchildren, but mine in a way the lake house hasn't felt in years." "Riverdale?" Rebecca sounded genuinely surprised. "You're moving closer to us?" "I'm moving forward," I corrected. "If that includes more time with Ethan and Lily, I'd like that. But I'm done being the convenient grandmother who maintains a vacation property you never use." The line went quiet, and I wondered if she'd hung up. Then, in a voice smaller than I'd heard from her in years, she asked, "Can we at least come say goodbye to the house?" It was a reasonable request, tinged with genuine emotion that pierced my defensive armor. "Of course," I said. "The closing isn't for 60 days. You have time." The Mendozas proved to be as perfect as I'd hoped. Maria Mendoza, with her infectious enthusiasm, immediately saw possibilities in the lake house that I'd forgotten existed. Her husband Carlos asked thoughtful questions about the property's quirks, where the septic system was located, how the old water heater operated, which trees needed special attention. Their children explored the property with uninhibited joy, the youngest discovering the tire swing I'd hung for Ethan years ago, squealing with delight as his father pushed him higher. "We'll take good care of this place," Maria assured me as we finalized the paperwork. "It has such wonderful energy. You can feel the happiness in these walls." I signed the final documents with mixed emotions, but no regrets. The cottage in Riverdale awaited me, its purchase already in progress thanks to the cash offer I'd made. Rebecca kept her word about visiting the lake house one last time. She arrived on a Saturday morning in late July, 2 weeks before my scheduled move-out date. I'd expected her to bring the entire family, but she came alone. "The kids are at their activities," she explained, not meeting my eyes. "And Charles is, well, he's not pleased about the situation." I didn't press for details. We walked through the house together, the silence between us heavy with unspoken feelings. In each room, Rebecca paused, touching familiar objects, clearly struggling, with emotions she couldn't quite articulate. In her old bedroom, now mostly packed up, she finally spoke. I always thought Lily and Ethan would have the same childhood here that I did, that they'd grow up knowing this place as their constant. I wanted that too, I admitted. But children grow in the environments we provide for them. Their world expanded beyond what this place could offer. Rebecca turned to me, her expression troubled. Are you saying that's our fault? Mine and Charles's? I'm saying it's reality, I replied carefully. You chose a different life for your family. A good life, with opportunities I couldn't have imagined when you were growing up. But choices have consequences. This is one of them. Something in my calm acceptance seemed to deflate her anger. She sank onto the window seat where she'd spent countless rainy afternoons reading as a child. I never meant for them to lose connection with you, she said quietly. Or with this place. I know. I joined her on the cushioned seat, the familiar view of the lake stretching before us. But intentions don't change outcomes. When the lake house became inconvenient compared to the Wellingtons' offerings, you chose what seemed best at the time. Rebecca didn't deny it. After a moment, she reached for my hand, the first genuine gesture of affection between us in months. What's this cottage in Riverdale like? She asked. The question surprised me. It's small but charming. There's a garden that needs attention, and a sunroom where I can read on rainy days. And it's closer to us. I nodded. About 30 minutes from your house. Rebecca squeezed my hand. Maybe we could start over there. Create new traditions. The olive branch was tentative but sincere. I squeezed back, cautious but hopeful. I'd like that, I said. But on different terms this time. Moving day arrived under an August sky so perfectly blue it seemed designed for goodbyes. Harold appeared at dawn with coffee and pastries, having appointed himself unofficial moving supervisor. By noon, the professional movers had loaded my carefully curated possessions. I was taking far less than I'd originally planned, having discovered a liberating joy in letting go of accumulated things. Last chance to change your mind, Harold teased as I locked the front door for the final time, the key feeling suddenly foreign in my hand. Not a chance, I replied, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. I'm ready. The drive to, Riverdale took 3 hours, though it felt shorter with Harold following behind in his truck, our occasional phone calls punctuating the journey. The cottage welcomed me with afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that needed washing and hardwood floors that creaked satisfyingly underfoot. By evening, my bed was assembled, essential kitchen items unpacked, and a takeout dinner from the local Italian restaurant shared with Harold on the back patio. To new beginnings, he toasted, raising his plastic cup of iced tea. To letting go, I countered, clinking my cup against his. The first weeks passed in a blur of practical tasks, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, learning the rhythms of a new home. I discovered which floorboards creaked, which windows caught the morning light, which local coffee shop made the best blueberry muffins. I planted chrysanthemums along the front walkway and hung bird feeders in the backyard. Rebecca called several times, our conversations carefully cordial but gradually warming. Then, 3 weeks after my move, she appeared at my door unannounced, Lily beside her. We were in the area, she explained awkwardly. Lily had a dentist appointment. We thought we'd stop by, see the new place. Lily stood slightly behind her, mother, taller than I remembered, her childhood roundness giving way to teenage angles. Her expression was cautious, caught between adolescent disinterest and genuine curiosity. I'm glad you did, I said, stepping aside to welcome them in. I just made lemonade. They followed me through the cottage, Rebecca making polite comments about the cozy charm, while Lily remained mostly silent. In the sunroom, however, something caught my granddaughter's attention. A drafting table I'd set up near the windows, art supplies arranged neatly on its surface. Is this for your painting, Grandma? She asked, the first words she'd spoken since arriving. Actually, I said, I thought it might be a place for you to work when you visit, if you want to. Lily looked startled, then touched. Her fingers trailed over the expensive brushes, the same ones I'd bought for the lake house, never used. Really? A hint of the younger Lily emerged from behind her teenage facade. Really, I confirmed. There's an art center downtown that offers classes. I picked up their schedule, thought you might be interested. Rebecca watched this exchange, something shifting in her expression. Later, as they prepared to leave, she hugged me. A real hug, not the perfunctory embrace we'd shared in recent years. "We'll come back next weekend," she said. "Ethan, too. He has a basketball game Saturday morning, but we could come for dinner after." "I'd like that," I replied. "But only if you actually come." She met my gaze directly. "We will, Mom. I promise." By November, the cottage had transformed from an empty shell into a true home. I'd painted the walls in colors I'd always loved, but Richard had found too bold. Hung artwork purchased from local artists, and cultivated friendships with neighbors who quickly became part of my weekly routine. Tuesday mornings meant coffee, with Marion from across the street, a retired nurse with a wicked sense of humor. Thursday afternoons, I volunteered at the Riverdale Library, my professional skills finding new purpose organizing their local history collection. Most surprising was my Wednesday pottery class at the community college, where my initially clumsy attempts at creating bowls had evolved into increasingly confident expressions. My kitchen shelves now displayed several lopsided but beloved creations, each representing hours of learning and laughter. The relationship with my family was evolving too, finding a new equilibrium based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Rebecca and the children visited every other weekend, not from guilt or manipulation, but from a gradually rekindled desire for connection. These visits had their awkward moments, especially with Ethan, who remained the most distant. But there were breakthroughs too, like discovering his unexpected interest in birdwatching, which gave us common ground for conversation. Lily flourished in the art studio I'd created, often arriving with sketchbooks full of new ideas. One Saturday, while Rebecca and Ethan went shopping, Lily remained behind, working intently on a watercolor while I read nearby. "Grandma," she said suddenly, "I'm sorry about the lake house." I looked up, surprised by the directness of her comment. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She set down her brush, choosing words carefully in that thoughtful way she'd always had. "Mom told us you sold it because we stopped coming. That's true, isn't it?" I moved to sit beside her. The lake house served its purpose for a beautiful chapter of our lives. When that chapter ended, it was time to create something new. "But we hurt you," she persisted, "by choosing other things." I considered how to respond truthfully without burdening her with adult complexities. Everyone makes choices about how to spend their time and what to prioritize. I made choices too, including the choice to create this new home where we can build different kinds of memories. She studied me with perceptive eyes that reminded me of Richard. "Are you happier here?" Question deserved honest reflection. Was I happier? The lake house had been filled with precious memories, with Richard's presence, with decades of family history. But this cottage represented something equally valuable: independence, growth, fresh possibilities. "I'm differently happy," I answered. Finally. And that's exactly right for this chapter of my life. Harold visited often, driving down from the lake to help with projects around the cottage or simply to share a meal. Our friendship had deepened into something neither of us had expected. Not quite romance, but something equally precious. A partnership of equals, built on mutual respect and genuine enjoyment of each other's company. "You look good, Eleanor," he remarked one evening as we sat on my patio watching the sunset. "Like yourself, but more so." I smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. By letting go of the lake house and all it represented, I hadn't lost myself. I'd found myself again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.